So last week, as I was prepping a video to kind of demonstrate this feature from Twitter where new tweets load and you see this See New Tweets button show up and you can click on it, I ended up taking a little bit more time making my clone of the Twitter UI. So I thought it'd be fun to go ahead and rebuild this mobile Twitter clone in Next.js using Tailwind CSS because I learned a few things along the way and I wanted to share those with you. So without further ado, I'm all coffeeed up here, got my Dunder Mifflin coffee cup, and I think that means we can go ahead and get started. So the Next app right now is pretty bare bones. We just have this home page that is returning hello, and I've gone ahead and made the _app component, which is the way you do nested layouts in Next. And the only thing it's doing is importing Tailwind, which we have set up with post CSS here, and I have a few tweaks I've made to the default Tailwind font sizes. So if we come over and look, we see our Next app is running here. It's just rendering the home page. And so let's just go ahead and start by looking at twitter.com here, and we'll just start from the top. So this header and this footer are kind of persistent elements in this UI. You know, you scroll Twitter, but these are always here. And then as you shift around, they change a little bit, but these really belong to the app layout component here. So I'm just going to code here for a little bit and I'll slow it down and let you know any interesting tidbits kind of as they come up. Okay, pretty simple here for the header. Just the profile picture so far, latest tweets. This is going to be dynamic here, this title. You know, as you switch these tabs, you see it says notifications or tweets or messages. But for now, we'll just make it static. And then we've got this border here on the bottom. And so we have that in our clone as well. Now let's leave this for kind of the main component, which is going to be the pages that change. And then let's go ahead and work on this footer down here. Okay, so one thing I'd like to point out here is how to make the footer kind of stick to the bottom and have our page component here just take up whatever space we have remaining in the height of the viewport. So Flex is a perfect way to do this. Conceptually, here we have header, and maybe this could be kind of main, so we can go ahead and wrap this in a main component just so we can see. Header, main, and footer, and main should really spread out, and flex to fill up this space. Well, we can use flexbox to do this. All we need to do is come up to the parent, make it a flex parent that is a flex direction of column, and that's going to lay these three things out in a single column right here. If we didn't have that, it would lay them out horizontally, but we want them vertically here, so we use column. And then we also want to give this parent a height. This is one way to do it, so that now our parent has a height of 812 here, which you can see is the height of our viewport. And so now all we need to do is tell this main component that it can grow using the flex1 class. Now the flex1 class is from Tailwind, but we can see if we look at the CSS rule, it applies. It's giving us this flex grow value, which is basically telling the whole flexbox hierarchy here, okay, this one can grow to fill the available space. And there we can see now the footer is pushed down here, but if I were to go ahead and grab this, and change the height, we can see the footer always stays to the bottom. So that's pretty neat, and I use that trick a whole bunch. Now I've just put these placeholder links in down here, but I already have copied some of the icons from Twitter, so I'm going to bring those in and replace these with those. Okay, so I've got these icons in the footer here now. And again, these I just copied the SVGs straight from Twitter. The only thing I did was turn them into a little function component that takes a class name and applies that along with some other kind of base classes here. Now, one interesting thing I learned was this about the stroke 0 class if you look at these icons and you were to take this off, by default, the stroke is thicker. You can really notice the difference here. It looks a lot thicker. And so I was confused about that when I was first comparing these. If we make this active right here and we were to look, I was like, I'm using exactly the same SVG icon. Why is it thicker? But stroke 0 kind of did the trick here. So that was something that I learned, and I just went ahead and applied it to all the icons down here. But then I passed through the class name so that from right here, we can set the width and the height. In a larger project, these would be coming maybe from an icon library. They'd be in a separate file. But for now, this works. And so I just tweaked and played with the height and width. I'm using flex here, and each link is a width 1/4. And then the icons themselves take up width 7 here with a little bit of padding just to tweak it a little bit closer to twitter.com. So the next step here is to get the actual navigation working. These are actually using different icons. This was something else that I learned, was that Twitter uses different icons here when they're active. And so I have all of those down here. You can see we have home icon, empty, search, empty. So the next step is to basically toggle these based on the active state. And so we actually need to wire up these 4 pages in our next app and then turn these into real links. So that's what I'm going to do next. All right, I have the basic navigation working here. I went ahead and imported link from Next and wrapped each one of our A tags with a link and the appropriate href. I also went ahead and created these 4 new pages, or the 3 new pages rather. One for Explore, one for Messages, and one for Notifications. And so you do that just by creating these files right here. And now we can click on these and we can see that the URL is updating and the content, the page content here is updating as well. So the next step is to actually get this navigation updating in the sense that, these nav icons know whether they're active or not. And if they are, we can go ahead and swap the icons and the color. So the color should be pretty straightforward. These SVGs can just take on the current color. So if I were to say text blue 500 on this one, and then text gray 500 on this one, there we can kind of see our icons are taking the color of their container. So I think that's going to be basically the strategy here. But we need some way to differentiate which ones are active. So I've already made a link, and I'm just going to pull this in. This is a link component that I'm using to wrap the next link. So right now we're just using the base link from Next. I wrote this component the first time I did this project, which we can see imports the exact same link and renders, passing through the href, but it does a little bit of extra stuff here. It pulls in the router, and then it just finds the current path name and compares that to the href that's passed in. And if it's the same, it'll append the active class name prop right here to the list of classes. Otherwise, it'll append the inactive class name. So other than that, it's doing basically exactly the same thing. It's just also rendering an A tag for us, so we can just do that all in one go. So I'll go ahead and update the footer with the link from my other project and then show you how it works. Okay, so I've wired up the home button here. Now, this link that I made, which uses this, it actually renders out the children here as a function. So we can see it invokes children and passes it the isActive derived state here. And that means when we're using it over here, and again, this is nothing that's coming from Next, this is just an API that I kind of made up. We get to use that isActive state inside of our template, and so we can customize the contents of our link based on that state. I like this pattern for doing stuff like this because, otherwise you'd have to make kind of 4 hook calls for each one of these and then get maybe a link component and an isActive state. You'd have to name them. Here it's local, it's scoped, isActive is scoped, so we don't have to come up with a name for it, like home is active and explore is active and notifications is active. Render props is a really nice pattern here, and we can just basically move the text color from our link right to our home icon here. And so we say the class name is what it was before, but if the route is active, make it blue. and if it's not, make it gray. So now when we click off home, we see that it goes from blue to gray. So we can do exactly the same thing for each one of these. So now if we look, we see we have all these nav icons turning blue and gray based on the active state. But like I said, if you look at Twitter, it's actually that the icons themselves change. And so this is, again, where the flexibility of kind of the render props pattern comes in handy, is that we actually just want to render a different icon. So I think down here we have home icon and we have home icon empty. So instead of rendering just the home icon with a different color, I think we just want to say, when we have the home icon, it should be blue, right? And then that's only true if this link is active. Otherwise, and we don't need an extra curly here. Otherwise, we want to render home icon empty as a gray icon. And so now we can see the icon is changing, it's empty, and the color is changing. So again, just the flexibility of these local render props, this state that is scoped to this block, this chunk of template, I think is really nice. So let me just go ahead and do this for the rest of the links. All right, so now we have all of the various icons changing and the URL is changing. If we were to see this, we can see everything's working back and forward. So our routes are set up now and it's looking pretty good. So one last thing I thought was cool was how we get this title to change. Right now it says latest tweets, and that's kind of statically in our header right here. But in Twitter, as you change, it changes dynamically. And to start, I'm just going to have a simple title here that says, notifications or messages or what have you. And if you look at the Next docs, one way you'll see them sharing state between page components and this app wrapper is just by using static properties right on the component instance, because this component that we're getting passed into my app is actually the component, the static function component from our kind of pages directory here. So if I were to come here right to home and say something like home.header title is equal to latest tweets, and then we come back to our app.js component, instead of just rendering latest tweets like this, we could just say component.header title. And now we see it disappears because we're on messages, but if we go back home, we see latest tweets. So we should be able to go and basically do this for messages, give it a header title of messages, notifications, and explore, we'll just call it, search. So this is just kind of a super simple way to have the page component affect state here in the app component. So I just thought that was, really interesting, really simple. I mean, this works great. And, we're just rendering here from component.header title. So it's just a static property on this function component. We're not using React state or portals or context or anything to change this. Right in this case, this header information is known at build time. It's all static. And so I thought this was a really neat kind of simple solution to this problem. Okay, so now that we've got kind of the app shell working, what I want to do now is just get the home screen, the actual feed of tweets, working just enough to kind of show you this little flexbox tip that I learned that was really the point that I wanted to get to in this video, because it was something I learned and I feel like it's just going to come up again and again. So I want to make sure and share that with you before wrapping this video up. So I'm just going to wire up some dummy data here for our Twitter home feed and fetch that using SWR and just render some dummy data so that we can style it according to the way it looks here on twitter.com. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll come back and get you updated. Okay, so I want to slow down here because this is kind of where things get tricky. These nested flex boxes always start to throw me for a loop. It's easy to like lose track of the nesting for me anyways. And so just wanted to slow down here and kind of catch you up. So we're just fetching some tweets from /API tweets. And once we get them, we are mapping over them. So each one of these divs here is a tweet. Go ahead and make this border a little bit lighter. And so when I look at this tweet right here, and again, I'm just keeping it simple, but if we just find something that's mostly text, right? And I'm not even gonna worry about this little part right here, but the main part of this, when I look at this, you know, we have this outer div right here, which has padding and it has the borders. So we're gonna need it to have the borders and then the padding on it, as opposed to outside of it, so that those borders go all the way to the edge, right? So that's kind of this outer div that I have right here. And then when we look at this, the main kind of breakdown I see, and again, just we're doing a little bit of simplification here, but I see one wrapper that's flex right here, which is going to be a flex row because we have one block for the image and then one block for the rest of the content. So that's the first kind of way I would break this down, is that this outer parent right here would be flex, and it would basically is like a kind of a 2-column flex system going on here, where the image is not going to shrink. It doesn't change at all. It's always, you know, looks like about 40 pixels wide. And then the content here is the rest of the space. And, you know, as this changes and stuff, you can kind of see that that's what is changing. So that's how I would think about this. And so right here we see div flex, and these are the two parts. The image here, the profile picture, I just, you know, found a width and height that looked good and made it rounded full, and it looks about the right size here for these avatars, a little bit bigger than what's in the header. Gave it the source from the tweet, and then just rendered a p tag right here. So the next part of this, which is kind of the tricky part, is this part right here. So basically we have the flex parent, we have the left part, and then we have the right part. So now we can make the right part and break this down even further, right? And this thing is going to be another flex parent, and it's going to have this row, and this time it's going to be in a column, right? It's going to be flex call, where it's going to be this column right here laid out vertically with the name and the timestamp and everything, then the substance of the tweet right here, and then kind of the icons right here. So it's boom, boom, and then boom. So that's 1, 2, 3 in column. So really we want this thing to be class name flex, flex call, and then this is gonna say, you know, Sam Selikoff, my name, and then my handle, and the handle is going to be a little bit lighter, text gray, I don't know, 300, and the name is going to be wrapped in, let's say, a font bold, something like that. Then we're going to have the tweet, and then we're going to have the icons. So if we come take a look at this, okay, 300 looks a little bit too light. And I think we can replace this with tweet.name and tweet.username. And these also look a little bit thinner. And then they have this dot, and then they have the timestamp. So let me work on that next. Okay, so I've got some more of the details in here. We just have kind of 4 spans making up this row of text right here. It's just a p tag, and we've got kind of the name, and we've got the username, and then we have this dot, and then we have the timestamp. And when I was originally doing this, I was feeling pretty good about this. I thought it looked all right. It seemed pretty simple, and I kind of went on. But what I found out is when I made different length names, I ran into some issues. So if I pop over here to my kind of mock server, right now I'm just creating stuff using my name and handle. But if I were to just create list tweet 5, and I just have this set up with Faker data, and this is one reason I really like doing this, using something like Faker to generate lots of different kinds of data so that it highlights these edge cases in my UIs. So now you'll see already this is complicating things a little bit. So the longer names are going to make our job a little bit tougher, but this is where kind of the fun comes in. So let's take a look really quick at how Twitter handles people with longer names and how they basically deal with it, what they decide to hide and what they decide to show. So if we find someone here like Patrick Mahomes, we see that it basically groups the name and the handle, and then it truncates it off, and then it shows our middle dot, and then it shows the timestamp. So if we were to make this kind of responsive, we can see it's basically truncating that part. So that is the part of this element here that can shrink to not take up more room, but it always stays on one line. And then this part of this element never shrinks. It is reserved. The space is reserved for the dot and the timestamp. So this guy shouldn't be able to shrink at all, just like this image over here doesn't shrink at all. And this is really the flex child that should be able to shrink to accommodate for the varying space here. So let me start building out this and then catch you up. Okay, so I think I'm at a good spot where I can teach you kind of the main trick, the main purpose of this video that I wanted to get to. Now, the first thing that I did here was just go ahead and split these up into these 3 blocks. We've got this header row right here of this content. So that's what I'm calling the header row, which is this p tag. Then we have the tweet text, and then we have a third div that we're going to fill in with the actual icons. So within this header row, I went ahead and made this a flex parent, right? And that laid out these like this in a row because the default direction is row. And then we have these 3 parts. So we have the name and the username, and then we have the dot, and then we have the time. And we could really put these conceptually kind of in their own thing as well. And maybe even say something like, we never want these to shrink. So let's just say flex shrink 0, right? And then I added the truncate class to this span of text right here. But you can see, in those cases where it is too long, even though this does have the truncate class, which again is kind of a handy utility that sets overflow to hidden and white space to no wrap, which should be enough to make it truncate or stop at least, and then text overflow with the ellipsis to give it the treatment, the ... treatment. But we can see it's not working, and I can still, it's just not truncating, even though this is clearly overhanging, right? So I remember when I originally tried to do this, and I just tried a lot of different things, making it like smaller, like width of 0, and then just telling it to kind of flex out. And you can see that kind of does something. We see the truncation here happening now. And so this is that child. So let's go ahead and come to the child here and add width 0 and flex 1. So you can start to see it has something to do with the width that the flex layout system is using to calculate here. And this kind of works in this case, but we can see it really screws up the rest of our cases here, and especially when it's too short. The name here is being truncated even though clearly it shouldn't be. And if we come back and look at Twitter, we can see what it should look like. So after a lot of tinkering with this and trying to fix it at the child level, what I eventually realized, and what someone actually shared with me the solution was that you have to go up to the parent. So the reason this is overflowing here has to do with the parent. So again, at the root level, we have this parent, and then we have the image, and then we have the tweet body. And again, we could kind of label this as if we wanted to as well, tweet body. and the avatar. So at this level, this is our first outermost flex parent, and then a child, and then a child. And ideally, this child should be able to shrink, but it's not. And the reason it's not is because how the browser treats text. In particular, text has this sort of intrinsic width. And when it comes to laying out text in certain layouts, if the width isn't specified, text will always have this intrinsic width, which is based on its content, which will basically always win. And so in our case, Flexbox here is going to respect the intrinsic width of this child. And so in this case, or in cases where it's too long, it's kind of like this is the intrinsic width of the child. It can't go below that. And so when our parent right here is laying out the avatar and then the tweet body, it's looking at the tweet body and saying, hey, you know what? This thing goes out here to 270 and I can't shrink that on my own because text has an intrinsic width and I can't do anything about it unless you tell me to do something about it. So all we have to do right here is come to the parent here and say, you know what? Regardless of your children, you do have a ability to go smaller, and we can make you either width 0, or in our case, we can just make you a min width 0. So if we add that, look at that. Our UI just snaps into place and all of our truncation kind of takes effect. And so really that is the trick. And it's all about the fact that the parent here is a flex. And we can actually see this if we were to remove this so that it breaks again, and then remove flex from the parent so that the avatar here and the name were just kind of next to each other. And then if we were to make this smaller, check this out. As soon as I make this small, then it works. So the truncation is actually working here. It's being respected in normal layout. But because of the way Flexbox works, when Flexbox is making its calculations, basically, it's going to use that intrinsic width property of text to do it. So that's why we need to come to this child right here and say min width of 0. And that will affect the way the Flex parent is laying this out. And it says, oh, okay, I can go ahead and shrink that child just like this. You almost wish that this was a Flexbox property, something like flex min width, because that would help us explain why this class is here. It's really to help in the Flexbox layout calculations. But this is how you do it for text. And now this is looking pretty good. It looks like our truncation is actually the wrong color. So why don't we put a text cool gray on the truncate right here, and then we'll just make sure the name is text cool gray 900, just like that. And now our ellipses are the right color. So this looks pretty good, and we can come over to our mock data here. Let's go ahead and make 50 tweets and see how this looks. And I think this is looking pretty good. The time is over to the left on the shorter names, but on the longer ones, we're getting that nice truncation treatment. And this looks pretty good. It looks like we lost our sticky footer here. I think we just need to come back to our app page where we render our main component here. And Flex 1, this is spreading up to take up the space, but we didn't say, if you do take up more space, go ahead and scroll. So we're just going to say overflow scroll right here. And that should bring our footer back. And now we have the feed and it looks great. Again, we have no kind of extra overlap or overhang. We can go to pages with less content and the footer still sticks, or if we went back and only had 5 tweets here, this still renders just fine. So this is definitely coming along. With this Flexbox stuff, it's kind of like Flexbox Inception almost. So sometimes I do find it helpful to use these little labels here. But basically, that is how I break these UIs down, where you look at the outside and you say, okay, what is moving and what's fixed? You start from the outside and work your way in. So let's go ahead and finish up this. We have this icon bar here. And if we pop over to Twitter, that is these icons just like this. That's kind of the last row in our tweet card column, and then we can wrap it up. So I'll do that and then pull you back in. All right, so I think we're just about done. First thing I did was go ahead and pull in these icons, which are just some SVGs I copied from Twitter. and gave them kind of the same treatment where we use fill current and just give them an explicit width and height here. And that way they can take on the color. So let me go ahead and undo what I did up here, because this is kind of where we left off. So we have these and they get laid out like that. We can color them. We want them laid out in a row. If we take a look at Twitter, we'll see they're in a row like this. So that's just a normal flex. And that should take care of that. And then we actually want them to spread out to fill in all that space. So that's going to be justify between for a flex row layout here. So that puts them all on the edge and then distributes the space evenly. And that's pretty nice. And that almost worked. But if you notice here for some of the smaller tweets, they don't go all the way to the edge. And in Twitter, they should always basically go all the way to the edge, even if the tweet is shorter. So again, looking at our structure here, these things are being spread all the way to the edges. But if we look at the icon bar, it's a child of this tweet body, right? So the tweet body in this case, earlier we were having trouble with it going too big. Well, now it's too small. And Flexbox is just going to say, oh, I only need 248 pixels to lay all this stuff out. That's all I'm going to take. And so this is where Flex Grow comes in. We can come here and say, you know what? If you're smaller than what you need to be, then why don't you go ahead and fill up the rest of the space? So if we slap a Flex 1 on that, then that makes this child fill in all the space. These two rows are fine, but now the icons, because we're using justify between, will fill it up. And so now the icons are very nicely laid out, filling up the whole space there, no matter if the tweet is long or short. So that is looking pretty good. And then the last thing here, I just went ahead and made the dates dynamic. So the date was already on the tweet. And I'm just using these new functions from this library called date functions. This is something I've started using instead of some other more, big classic date libraries. This one just gives you a few functions. You can parse it as an ISO and then format it for the month and day. And that's all we need to do here. And then we just get all the dates here dynamically. And again, they're being pulled in the right direction, and they never shrink no matter, how long they are. If we were to do like a longer version of the date, we can see, our layout is working exactly as we intend it to. The dot and the time never shrink. We give them priority, and then that lets the rest of the name and the handle shrink to make room. So Flexbox, pretty powerful stuff, but a little bit like Flexbox Inception here once you have lots of parents and children, and then children who are parents again. But hopefully you learned something there. And again, this tip is really the thing that it took me a long time banging my head against the desk before realizing this, and understanding that the way Flexbox treats text has to do with this notion of intrinsic width. So sometimes you need to explicitly tell the child you can go below your intrinsic width. You can go either to width 0 or min width 0. There's a good CSS tricks article on this as well with some more examples. I'll link that as well. I'll upload this and link it in GitHub, and I'll also throw it on to Netlify. And now I'm actually ready to make the video I wanted to make last week, which was showing you how to make this feature on Twitter, where sometimes when you come over here and it's been a while, this little button will show up. I wonder if I can get it to actually show up. But if you are on the page or you visit a tweet and then go back, see, there it is. We have this button right here that shows up. It says see new tweets. And so Twitter does this. So instead of just rendering out from under you and showing you the latest version right away, they give you this little button. And if you click on it, it's going to take you to the top and load all the latest data. So I wanted to kind of show how to make that functionality. And now we have this nice Twitter clone here that we can use to do just that. So thanks for sticking with me through that. Hope you learned a thing or two, and I'll see you in the next video.